and Maya Contreras, and Rana Abdelhamid. Just a couple pieces of housekeeping. As you may have just heard, this meeting is being recorded. If you don't feel comfortable having your face being recorded, just turn your video off. This full video will be available on our YouTube page after the event. So the way it's going to work today, we're going to have each of the three candidates give a 10-minute speech, and then we'll have 15 minutes for a question and answer period, during which we're going to prioritize CoDA members' questions first, and then we'll open it up to the general public if there's more time. We ask members keep their questions to 30 seconds in an interest to get as many questions in as possible. Last thing, for membership, we will have our endorsement meeting on Thursday, the 13th, which you all should have gotten an email about. If you haven't paid your dues yet, you can contact Jake Wolf, our treasurer, and link up with him about getting those in. But and we'll talk about that more at the end. Without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our first candidate, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Is she, Sean? Is she in the room? There she is. Carolyn, you are muted. I think you're on mute, Carolyn. James, maybe if you're there, are you able to Oh, great. Can't unmute yourself.
We just made you a co-host, Carolyn, so try to do it now.
But
there we go. The third year of the Zoom pandemic, and we're still working on it. We had you for a minute there, Carolyn.
New person helping me with this, since my office usually helps me, but this is campaign. Yeah. So I have a campaign volunteer helping me. And
no worries, that's on us.
I apologize for having technical difficulties.
No worries at all. As I was saying, so you've got about maybe a 10-minute speech and then a 15-minute Q&A period. If you want to speak any less than that, 10, we'll just add on to the Q&A. Whenever you're ready, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, I want to thank CoDA so much for inviting me to the Candidates Forum. I'm thrilled to be with you, as I was this past Friday at the CoDA Three Kings celebration, which had the first camel I have ever seen in America. It was an incredible event, like many of your events. And like many of you, I was here in New York in my apartment during the pandemic. I'll never forget the sirens going all night and day, and the fear that we faced in finding tests and having hospital beds. And like many of you, I quickly jumped into action with my fellow neighbors, both legislatively and through mutual aid. I worked 24/7 to organize PPE distributions, meal handouts, vaccine pop-ups, and worked with my colleagues in Washington to make sure that New York got its fair share in the relief package so that you could have an equitable recovery for all New Yorkers. As a legislator, I wrote 3 important bills, one of which was enacted into law, that our PPE equipment had to be made in America so we don't face shortages like we had before, seeing our doctors and nurses going to work in garbage bags. I'm proud of having authored and passed that legislation. And while there is a great deal that we did, this is not a time to sit on the sidelines. There's much more that needs to be done. And now is a time for bold, progressive action, which has been my trademark my entire career in public service. After many years of talking and not getting things done, for 100 years, they planned the 2nd Avenue subway. When I went to Congress, I built the first subway, not in New York City, not New York State, but the entire country. the first leg of the Second Avenue subway. Just yesterday, Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg called me and said they're moving it to the engineering stage, which means we are galloping towards getting $3.4 billion in federal aid to build the subway up to 125th Street. There are plans after that to go to stage 3 and 4, which goes through the CoDA Avenue. I am proud to have helped secure, as chair of the Oversight Committee, over $100 billion from the American Recovery Act to come to our city. We needed it to recover from the pandemic so that families could stay in their homes, small businesses could keep their doors open, and Americans could get vaccinated. Not one Republican had the decency or the guts to try to help our city and their country. They all voted against the recovery plan. Many of you might know that my first job was teaching English as a second language in East Harlem and Western Queens. And when funding for the program was cut, I became the lobbyist for the program. I went to Albany to get it back. I won the program and got it restored. I could see the strength of and the vitality of public service. And I worked for two speakers, the Democratic leader of the state legislature, before entering public service and running for the city council. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, Christina, there was no family leave. I remember today calling and saying, what are your policies? They said, there are none. We expect you to leave. I said, I don't want to leave. They said, you'll be the first one. I had to fight for my job. I had to fight to keep my job. And when I went to the city council and Congress, I have always fought for paid family medical leave. I'm proud of having authored and passed the bill that passed paid leave for the birth of a child. And in the Build Back Better plan, we have paid leave for every American family in America. And I'm proud that with Nydia Velasquez, I was arrested for protesting the anti-apartheid policies of South Africa. Proud that on the city council, I introduced the first marriage equality bill in New York state history. And at the time, the speaker refused to print it. This is the progress we've made. The speaker said it's unconstitutional. We're not going to even print your bill. I had to fight to get the bill printed. Nothing is unconstitutional until the Supreme Court says it. So I had to fight to get that. And now same-sex marriage is the law of the land. Proud that after a ridiculously long slog, although we had funding achievements during it, I finally passed the 9/11 Health and Compensation Act to get the health care to our 9/11 responders, survivors that they so justly need. This has been over a $98 billion bill. But proud that after a ridiculously long time, it did finally pass. And some will say, what the hell's wrong with you? It took 18 years. I'll just say that change doesn't come easy, but it will come if you never quit. I take on the big fights and I never quit once I take them on. I have never been intimidated by big corporations, which is why I've always fought for the people. I beat the big banks and passed the Credit Card Reform Act, keeping over, according to the Consumer Financial Control Board, 16 billion, as in B, in consumers' pockets, and instead a year, 16 billion a year, and ending outrageous fees and penalties of the financial industry. It's been called one of the most important consumer protection bills ever to pass. And as the first woman to be elected as chair of the Joint Economic Committee and as first woman for the Oversight Committee, I've gone after Big Pharma for their role in drug pricing, the Sackler family for their role in opioid epidemics, and I've taken on the fossil fuel industry, holding a historic hearing with the top 4 heads of fossil fuel industry CEOs on their role in the fossil fuel disinformation campaigns. Later this month, I'm having another hearing with them on what are they doing to combat and cut harmful fossil fuel emissions so that we can fight climate change. But my beliefs have not always been popular, and many have tried to shoot them down. Nevertheless, I'm proud of speaking out firmly for what I believe in and for what I believe is right. fighting big injustices like fighting for paid family leave. No one should have to choose between a family and their job, or something like reinvesting education. I've always made education one of my top priorities as a former teacher. Progressive leaders need to stand arm in arm to secure climate justice, gender justice, racial justice, economic justice, and I've been fighting for progressive values my entire life. That is why I've been endorsed by my colleagues and the Progressive Congressional Caucus, the Black Caucus, the Asian Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus. My commitment has kept me bold, and my persistence has delivered real progress. I would be honored to receive the support of CoDA for my 2022 re-election campaign. I want to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to talk with you today, and the opportunity to work with you. We fought together for an accurate census. I'll never forget the press conference CoDA had. John Blasco led it, and we even had a marching band going through the neighborhood. Sign your census. Every weekend we were out with tables everywhere, getting everyone to make them aware that they had to fill out their forms. That was a big thing. And then bringing to the community, and we have another one coming, working with Carlina and Harvey, another vaccine van and access for the community coming, but we've had them at several of the developments, and we've worked hard to bring the testing and the services to the community. I can keep talking forever. Is my time up? I don't know. Joshua?
Yeah, you've got about 2 minutes left, but if you'd like, we can jump straight into question and answer. I'm
Okay,
sure we
let's
have
go to
plenty of
questions then.
perfect. So Sean, we'll call it like 17 on the Q&A. Before we do that, I just want to let everyone know we actually have a closed caption service available if that would benefit anyone. If you open up your Zoom window, you'll see a CC and then a live transcript. If you click on that, you'll be able to access the closed captioning feature to follow along with all of this here. But yes, thank you, John. We'd like to open it up to the floor if any CoDA members have any questions for the Congresswoman, and then to the general public. Just go ahead and use the raise hand feature on your participants tab, and we can ask the Congresswoman some questions. Just give that a minute there. Okay, I see Damaris. Go ahead, Damaris.
Sorry. Hi. I'm keeping my camera off mostly because I'm sick and a bubbling mess, and I don't want you all to see me sneezing and blowing my nose the whole meeting. But it's thanks for letting me ask my question. Thank you, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, for being here. And I have my question is about voter suppression. And so, you know, we have been fortunate enough to live in District 12 and in a district that, you know, is still the majority is still Democratic. But the work that we have to do to maintain the democracy in this country, you know, spans across the entire United States and requires all of Congress to stand up and support that work continue. And as we've seen, you know, across the country, you know, the Republicans are with their sweeping plan to, you know, suppress our votes. I'm interested in knowing from you what you see is your role and what you might be doing to support fighting back this, you know, horrific plan and campaign from, you know, the Republicans to suppress the votes of, you know, mostly people of color, low-income people across this nation.
Well, Damaris, I think you asked the most important question. Nothing's more important than our elections, our free elections, and we just had a remembrance, an important remembrance of January 6th and all of the things that we are doing to combat the efforts of the Republicans. They put a big lie out saying that that Joe Biden didn't win the election. Well, the biggest lie came from the Republicans that were lying about that, and mainly Mr. Trump. So there's been a lot of efforts. What is very disturbing to me is that a lot of the reforms and voting reforms that went into place under former President Johnson, they're busily now trying to erase them, and we have to fight back. So Congress put in and passed a bill in the House. It is now in the Senate. It is the goal of Leader Schumer to get this through the Senate. It's in any way possible. We are saying that we want to carve out for voter rights with the so-called, the demand that they have 60 votes. We shouldn't have the filibuster for something as important as the right to vote. So this is going to be possibly the biggest fight next week. The bill that we put forward was named after my good friend, an icon. I was honored to serve with John Lewis, one of the great leaders of the civil rights movement, a great friend of Martin Luther King. And as his colleagues said on the floor, he said he wasn't the wisest, but he was always the bravest, the one who really put his life on the line fighting for the cause. He was a great person. We named the bill after him, and we hope to pass it. But what we have done on the state and federal level have passed early voting laws, which have opened it up for people to vote. So many people work. So when we passed the early voting, we almost doubled the number of people voting because they could vote on the weekend, they could vote at night, they could vote early in the morning. So we have to continue with our early voting and our registration and our other efforts, the efforts now to registrate children in school so that when they graduate and they are eligible to vote, that they are already registered. All of these are important efforts that we need as we go forward. We also need to strengthen our democracy in every way. And we passed in Congress a bill called Protecting Our Democracy Act. And this was a direct response to January 6th. I was honored to lead that debate and to lead the passage before the Rules Committee and the Congress on that bill and authored important sections. We took every way where Mr. Trump tried to take away our democracy and filled it with laws to protect it. For example, one of my bills was the Whistleblower Protector Act, which would keep the president from retaliating against whistleblowers that were showing wrongdoings. One important part of our government is called inspector generals, and they are there to investigate government for waste, fraud, abuse, any wild action. And I had a bill, he would, if they had an investigation.
Congresswoman, if I could, I just see a couple other, I would just love to get, just since we have limited time, I'd love to get to a few other questions if you don't mind, if there's anything else you want to just wrap up that just.
Okay, well, he would just throw these inspector generals out if they started an investigation. My bill says you can't do that. You have to reason, you have to have a reason, you have to have a reason that they did it. This is called the Protecting Our Democracy Act. Also in the big lie, they keep saying that I better stop talking.
No,
Go to my website. I have an old thing about the whole cyber ninjas and how they said that the Democrats stole the election, showed that they were lying. Even the Republicans under oath said there was nothing wrong. Go and read it. And yet these Republicans claim and still live the big lie, saying the election was stolen.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We have, in the interest of getting to a few other members, just a reminder to our questioners, just try to keep it to 30 seconds to give the Congresswoman time to respond to as many questions as possible. Lila, I see you next, and then Alana.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my question to you, Maloney, is you voted in favor of the Promesa Act. As you know, the Lower East Side has a big population of Puerto Ricans. And so just, with everything going on in Puerto Rico and a lot of our families dealing with the austerity measures that are happening, how are you going to try to, I don't know, you voted on something that has been harmful to our island. How are you trying to, I don't know what I'm trying to ask, but what are you doing for the Puerto Rican community?
One of my best friends in Congress is Nydia Velasquez. I went to Puerto Rico this past year with her to see the Ida of destruction and to work together on that. I have always supported the determination of Puerto Ricans to make the determination themselves for the future of the island. And I worked with her on the federal help and aid through the Financial Services Committee, on which we both serve, to get to the island after the time that, you know, after the thing that happened. Now, I think what you're talking to is the fight that the oversight board that they have in Puerto Rico now. I think we could limit the Puerto Rican Oversight Board activities, and we should not have bonds valued over pensions and savings and support for the people of Puerto Rico. And I worked with Nydia on that bill too. And I am for comprehensive immigration reform, for protecting the dreamers, and for moving forward. I've always been a strong supporter of Puerto Rico. And in fact, I used to represent the birthplace of Puerto Rico in America, East Harlem. I represented East Harlem and the city council for years. So I've always been a strong supporter and was a strong supporter of the financial aid, the aid that Rana worked so hard on for the mass transit system. And I've been a friend and supporter to Puerto Rico, and even taught English as a second language in East Harlem. So.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Josh,
Yes,
I don't know if you see my hand.
I see you, Tito. I've got.
Okay.
Thank you, Tito. I've got Alana, then Mike, then Tito, then Pedro, and hopefully we can get all those in about 7 minutes. On you, Alana.
I'll be quick because I had a similar question. And thank you for coming. I was happy to see that you're for a shortened timeline for the Fiscal Control Board. Are you in favor of repealing Promesa, canceling the island's debt, and eliminating the control board?
Very good.
I don't think that's going to get through Congress, but I'm for it, sure. And Puerto Rico has always been a great asset to America.
Thank you, Alana. Mike Schweinsberg, go ahead, please. And you're muted, Mike.
I'm sorry, I thought you unmuted me, but okay, fine.
All you.
Congresswoman, thank you very much for attending today. Good to see you again. I thank you for retelling your amazing history and all the legislation and you've been fighting for, all the work you've done for our community. What you have not highlighted is what makes me feel so fondly about you, because I believe that the disability community has no greater friend in the House. And so, you know, and I know that many members of CoDA care about disability, the fight for disability rights. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things you've done for the disability community?
Well, I would say that the only subway that's been built in the country that is totally ADA accessible is the 2nd Avenue subway. Every single stop is ADA compliant. We also have federal funding. There's also federal funding for ADA compliant elevators at the subway stop on the Lexington line on around the 68th Street and also down at 14th Street. It has to be accessible. One of the things that I'm doing right now, I think it is to have a healthcare center at every housing development. I brought one into Queensbridge so that you can get your vaccinations, your healthcare, your treatment right there on premises. I'm trying to get one into Astoria houses, one of the most underserved vaccinated areas. And what is holding it up is that we're putting in a mobile van to serve, but it's not ADA compliant. So we are now working to get a special ramp made so that the residents can get up that ramp into the healthcare center. When I was on the city council, one of the projects that I took was to make my entire district compliant with the curb cuts. We should have this all over the city. But at the time, mine was the only district that had the curb cuts for the residents to get around the city. And I have usually, I've had many people who have had disabilities work for me in my office. I have one now, but I've always had people that have overcome disabilities to serve in government, and they've done so with me in government. And I always have a sharp pencil when it comes to federal funding, making sure that the projects are ADA compliant and that the law is being passed, but also have taken initiatives on my own to move forward in my own hiring and in my own projects to make sure that they are ADA compliant. And that's a true story. What is holding up the whole opening up this is making sure that there is a compliant way for ADA, for people with disabilities to get to the health center.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Mike. Tito, I see you next. I asked you to unmute there. Are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? Thank you.
So I have several questions, but I know I'm only allowed one. I'm glad that people brought up the issue of Puerto Rico and Promesa, because that was going to be my question. However, people dealt with that already. So my question is the following. Every year we get elected officials come down and say how much they're doing for public housing, yet public housing is in worse shape than ever. In my neighborhood now in Chelsea, the private sector has come in. Basically, they're going to manage it. And, this particular group that's managing is infamous for evicting people. What that means is that after the person leaves, the apartment no longer falls under public housing. What are you doing for public housing? Because Nydia comes every year and tells us how much she does for public housing. However, you see the state of public housing. I grew up in public housing. There are good people in public housing, and we shouldn't be treated this way. So that's my question. Thank you.
And you,
And there is a waiting list of over 250,000 people in our city now trying to get into public housing. And when you talk about preserving or building housing, the first thing you can do is protect public housing. There is an assault on it. I am opposed to any way, shape, or form in any way that they are trying to privatize it. Because when they privatize it with RAD or any of whatever blueprint, whatever they want to call the program, they are moving it out of being affordable. One of the things that have happened in the district that I represent, there's been an effort by this mayor, by de Blasio, to lease playgrounds of children at public housing, the public space in public housing, to private developers for high class, what do you want to call it? High market rate, unaffordable housing. It has been a fight personified to stop them. I have stopped them with my colleagues at Cooper's in Brooklyn and at Stanley Isaacs in Manhattan, and all of their efforts to privatize these efforts. But Tito's right, we need to invest, and we are not investing enough. Last year, we put in $25 billion into federal housing in NYCHA. That's not enough. In the Build Back Better program, we secured $60 billion federally, countrywide for public housing. But out of that $60 billion, $40 billion is designated for New York City, which was the city's request to make their capital improvements. So we have to pass this bill to get the money out of Washington and into the repairs in public housing. One of my causes, I've got to tell you this, Joshua, is that what they do with the biggest mistake, they centralized repairs, which means they don't make any. They want to run them into the ground. So I have gotten a model project. They tell me they may make it citywide now to reverse that, to bring repairs back to the projects. Also, one of my goals is to bring a public health center to every public housing development in the community I represent. I have brought one to Queensbridge, that's 7,000 people. I am in the process of bringing one to Astoria houses, and I hope to bring one to Campos houses. We keep bringing Ryan Health Center in every now and then to provide services to the people. They deserve a healthcare center there. So helping people, and I have concrete achievements with the health centers, with the decentralization of the repairs, and with working with Nydia and others to bring $40 billion, unbelievable amount, to NYCHA this year in the passage of the Build Back Better bill.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think we'll have to leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for being such a great community partner. I believe, as Diana Morales says, the best ideas come from the community, and we need more community leadership, and that's what CoDA is about. So I want to thank you, and I yield back, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Okay, moving right along. We'll ask the Congresswoman and anyone on her paid staff to leave the room at this point, as we welcome in our next candidate, who is Maya Contreras. And for those of you who we didn't get to the questions, sorry, we'll try to, we've got a couple more candidates. Hopefully you have some questions for them as well. Maya, are you in here? Hey, you are sideways, but we see you. You're muted, Maya.
There we go.
And you're,
Am I sideways?
You're sideways, but if I go like this, I can see you.
All right, let me fix this. I don't want to be sideways.
There we go. And while we do that, just a reminder that we'll give you about 10 minutes to speak, and then we'll do a 15-minute Q&A. If you'd like to yield back any of that 10, we'll just tack it on to get a couple more questions in the Q&A period.
Sure. Let me just get this settled now that this is okay. Oh, technology. Oh, remote technology. So my name is Maya Contreras. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. For those who may need a brief audio description, I have curly brown hair, melanated skin. I'm wearing a black and white jacket, and I'm standing in front of white kitchen cabinets in my kitchen. First and foremost, I want to thank each member of CoDA for hosting this panel today and inviting me to participate. This opportunity is deeply meaningful to me. I'm a lifelong artist and a community advocate who hails from 4 generations of artists and community advocates. I've also spent much of my life in the service industry, supplementing my art and advocacy. Avenue C is where I live. Alphabet City is my home. I live in an HDFC with my husband, Bobby. We've lived in and around Lower East Side for 18 plus years. I bartended on Bowery Street, played drums at CBGB's for Afropunk, and I got married at the Box on Christie Street. I earned my master's degree in public policy at NYU. I am currently the chairman of our neighborhood advisory board on Manhattan 3. This is our home, our community, and we're all attending this forum today because we're fiercely protective of it. I was raised by a single mother. We spent most of our life, her short life, being severely rent burdened, evicted from our home, unhoused, and food insecure. I lost my mother to breast cancer when I was 16. I moved my grief into advocacy because I felt that I was needed somewhere, and where I was needed was in housing advocacy. So at that age, at 16, I founded an organization called Hope to Speak Of, which I worked on housing and food insecurity issues in Sarasota, Florida. My organization directly challenged Sarasota City Commissioner's discriminatory policy of busing unhoused people out of town. For those actions, I received several local and national accommodations. In college, I transformed Hope to Speak Of to De las Mujeres, a nonprofit which focused on Black and Latina LGBTQ housing issues. As a bisexual Black and Latina woman, I saw the multiple ways the LGBTQ community was facing housing issues, from wage gaps to discrimination. I ran that organization throughout my undergraduate years. The organization's focus included working with city commissioners and the shelter system in Tallahassee to advocate for permanent housing. During my time in the service industry, I fought for workers' rights, protections against wage theft and discrimination. I threatened the Cheesecake Factory with a class action lawsuit after I recorded multiple racist slurs directed at Black coworkers and threats of deportation to my fellow Latino coworkers. The CEO flew in, met with me, and quietly changed how they conducted employee training. My advocacy led me to New York, where my grandfather originally immigrated from Valparaiso, Chile. In New York City, I continue to center those most vulnerable to housing insecurity, from working in a hidden shelter where I assembled backpacks and read to children who had a parent that survived interpersonal violence. I advocated for those that are facing eviction on their homes and continue to do so, and those suffering from isolation or living in inaccessible conditions at shelters or in their own buildings. I do this through research, locating resources for them, procuring legal aid, and sitting down with members of City Council like Carlina and former City Council member Margaret Chin, and now new City Council member Christine Richardson Jordan. I became a voting rights advocate in 2013 after the Voting Rights Act was gutted by the Supreme Court, triggering a wave of voter suppression across the US. In 2016, I co-founded All Women's Progress Policy Center to create a progressive policy center dedicated to improving the lives of women and marginalized groups through research and education. I organized and hosted a national policy conference featuring Tarana Burke, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, Rebecca Coakley, and attorney Kristen Clark, to name a few. The first policies All Women Progress worked on were inaccessibility issues that the disability community faced when attempting to cast their ballot. We also conducted research on wage loss owed to survivors due to sexual harassment and sexual violence. As a voting rights advocate, I have organized national voter outreach programs, including 2018 Step Up and Vote, which provided voter support and registration to all 101 historical Black colleges and universities. I've conducted voting rights lectures and seminars across the country, including Brennan Law Center, the Brennan Center for Justice, the Pratt Institute, Clark University, NYU, Pride Law at the University of San Francisco, to name a few. I've testified in support of the New York State Voting Rights Act and the New York State Senate on March 2020, and became the National Women's Media Center Progressive Voice in 2020. So why do I want to run for Congress? Why do I want to run at the federal level and challenge a long-term incumbent? I'm running at the federal level for several reasons. But one of them is because I believe the federal budget is a moral document that sets the tone for many state budgets and this nation's narratives. And right now, our federal budget is an immoral one. It's distributing too much money where it is not needed and too little money where it is desperately needed. Our US government's Pentagon has failed its last 4 audits at the cost of $200 million per audit. The Department of Homeland Security took 10 years to pass a clean audit, meaning these institutions do not know where all the money is going or how it's being spent. This is a travesty that would be unacceptable in any other industry. I'm running for Congress because our country has a broken record repeating the same bad tune. Right now, there are 214,000 active eviction cases in New York City. 1 in 5 of those cases are single mothers. Nearly 1 in 4 children is food insecure in New York City. It's approximately 400,000 children. That's unacceptable to me. And that's personal for me. Across the street from my apartment, the Reese houses have been without heat for the past 5 nights. That is infuriating. 1,000 New York restaurants have closed. Small artistic institutions like Theater 80 on St. Mark's Place are threatened with foreclosure. People are losing or have lost their livelihoods. Those that are still working, like my husband and friends in the service industry, teachers and essential workers, are working in unsafe conditions with little to no protections. We have a government that thinks migration is a crime, as evidenced by our inhumane border policy. We have congressional members that talk about wiping away all of student debt, but are very silent when discussing canceling Puerto Rico's colonial debt. We have far too many members of Congress too squeamish to even discuss harm reduction initiatives like supervised drug injection sites, decriminalizing sex work, and ending solitary confinement. While I'm thankful that Biden has beat Trump, Biden has yet to say the word abortion in any public remarks since taking office, at a time when abortion access is on the chopping blocks. Finally, I want to thank Rep. Maloney for her almost 30 years in Congress. When I spoke with Rep. Maloney and told her I was challenging her, I said it wasn't personal, it's about policy. But I firmly believe that policy is deeply personal because it directly impacts every single minute of our lives. I believe it is time to move to a new representation with a much broader spectrum of inclusion, one that is culturally competent and is deeply passionate about our community. On other occasions where I have met and spoken with Maloney, I came away with the belief that she does not fundamentally understand the multiple causalities of poverty, nor understands this fierce urgency of now. If she did, that would be reflected in more of the priorities and policies she introduced or co-sponsored as legislator. I've watched her hand accommodations to groups for combating food insecurity that didn't need that piece of paper for their critical work. They needed funding. I have heard her say on more than one occasion, I can't imagine what it's like to live in poverty. I don't have to imagine that. I intimately understand it, its harms and its causalities. This is why I've been endorsed by Black Disabled Lives Matter, the Immigration and Refugee Organization FELT, the Veterans Association, and Black Veterans for Social Justice, President Wilfredo Hernandez. If I have the honor to serve in Congress and represent this community, I'll be one of only a handful of people serving who's ever been on food stamps, now called SNAP, who have been unhoused, who have been severely rent burdened the majority of my life. No one else running in this district has been on SNAP or unhoused. I know because I asked them. I know what it's like to have a family decimated due to healthcare costs incurred by a broken healthcare system. I'll be the type of legislator that will continue to fight for good, equitable legislation, even after it's passed into law, like fully funding public housing, codifying Roe v. Wade, because I know our job does not end there. Finally, okay, thank you. I had one more sentence, but hey, not bad.
That was no. That's the 1 minute marker. You have one more minute. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
I felt like I was on a game show just then. Okay, I will continue to fight to protect these resources, fully fund them, and make sure everyone understands how to access them, and most importantly, has access to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, for that timely presentation. We'll now open it up to the floor for questions and answers. Once again, just to reiterate, first we will prioritize CoDA members. I see Io will be first, don't worry, Io. And then if we have time remaining after that, we'll get to members of the general public. And just a reminder, once again, please, in the interest of getting as many questions in, please limit your questions to 30 seconds. And obviously, Maya, we'd appreciate the ability to get as many questions in as possible.
Sure, I will do my best to be succinct.
We appreciate it. So call it, what, 15 minutes, Sean? And take it away, Io.
Are you calling on me? I'm sorry, are you calling on me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Great. Okay, so it's a bit quiet. But anyway, so I understand that you live in HDFC. The intent of the state law that created HDFC. The intent of the law that created HDFC is to make sure that the units and the buildings remain affordable in perpetuity. So I would like to know, since you know so much about low-income housing or affordable housing, what is the amount, the highest amount that a unit was sold in your building? And what do you think should be the cap on units that are sold in HDFC co-ops?
Okay, so the highest amount in my building that I saw the last record for was about $500,000. It was about $550,000. That was on the top floor, and I think that last sale was a couple of years ago. But I mean, to me, $550,000 is quite a lot of money, I believe. My apartment in my building that me and my husband paid for was $365,000. Every record in this building, most of them should be public, but not all of them are, to be honest. There's a couple that are missing that I'd like to know what they paid, so I don't know. I think that for HDFCs, there should be a cap, to me, at $400,000. To me, this is still a massive cost. We live in a 300 square foot apartment in our building. We paid $375,000 for a 300 square foot apartment. We live in a micro, it would be considered almost a micro studio apartment. Yes, and for those who may not be familiar with HDFCs, a little bit like CLTs. It's a shared equity ownership model. I do believe I'd like to see more HDFCs be available to New Yorkers. I do believe there should be caps because there are other HDFCs up the street from me and in Brooklyn that went for $1 million. HDFCs should not reach that height of money. They're not supposed to be there to make profit off of. They're really there to make sure we don't have rent hikes, gentrification, real estate speculation. So to me, I would love to see a cap. Personally, right now, I'd like it to be capped at $500,000. I hope that gives you a bit of an answer of how I feel about that.
Thank you, Maya.
Yeah.
I see Lila next. And if anyone has any questions, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Lila, go ahead.
Hi, Maya. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
So I am reading your education platform, and I'm just curious more. Have you visited the schools in this neighborhood, and do you know the needs that are happening currently with the schools? Because I feel that your work is amazing, but it just doesn't feel like it's in the communities that you're trying to service. So can you expand on some of your education platforms within this neighborhood?
Of course. I will say this, my husband is a teacher, so I do want you to know that. I had more schools, I have more friends that were teachers that quit in the last couple of years, and they're the ones that kind of gave me, they're the ones that have more told me why they don't want to be in schools anymore. I did work in a school in Bed-Stuy. I used to do children's shows there. That was a school that had broken air conditioners. They had cutbacks on arts, food, and funding. I actually do talk to a lot of the parents in this area about what is needed. I have spoken to a lot of people in this area. Teachers are that's a deeply personal thing to me. My grandfather was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. I do deeply care about teachers and what they're dealing with and going through. Some of the things that I talked about with teenagers in this area, what they were dealing with, a lot of them told me that they were dealing with isolation problems, which was something that I had only heard about with senior citizens before the COVID pandemic happened. But so in this neighborhood, when I'm talking to teachers, it's been some of the same issues that they've had across the district, which is they'd like to see more funding, more investments. They would like to see reinvestments in arts and language programs. They would like improved school lunch programs. A lot of the teachers I spoke to are still working 2 jobs to deal with their wage or lack thereof income. So I want you all to know that I am very much talking to and speaking with teachers. I have sat down and spoke to them. My husband teaches at the collegiate level over at Stony Brook, but I have talked to people at CUNY and SUNY and some of the issues that they're facing, what they would like to see change. So I'm sorry, I don't know if that answers your question, but I do deeply care about, I definitely care about the schools in this neighborhood and talk to people. I'm actually quite social, so that's why I do talk to the parents and the teachers and to find out what their needs were. The aspect where I did talk about gentrification, not just gentrification, but diversifying the schools. One of the things that teachers had told me is that they would like to see more diversity within the teachers to match what's going on with the students. The students are ethnically diverse, but there's still a lot of ethnic diversity within the teachers. I'd like to see more of that. So these are some of the things that I've spoken with them. I have not sat in the classes during schools, mostly because in the past year, it's COVID, and also I would need a special pass to do that, but I have done that at other schools that invited me to come in. So.
Thank you, Maya.
Sure.
I see Pedro Lopez next. And if any members of the general public have questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature and we can get to you next in the stack. But Pedro Lopez, please go ahead.
Yes, my question is, I guess taking the political situation that we find ourselves, are you willing to leverage your vote for meaningful material gain for us and the working class of the country? A lot of times people, they would just cave in and just settle for crumbs. But I think for me as a constituent of this district, I want a fighter. I want someone that will stand up boldly for things that will meaningfully change the lives of me and my family and my community.
Yes, unequivocally, yes, of course. One of the things that has been problematic with Congress for a very long time is incrementalism. And sometimes I'd say almost, we understand that progress takes time and sometimes compromise is necessary, but there's been too much compromise and too much incrementalism for too long. As MLK says, there is a fierce urgency of now, which means people need to know that we do need bold change. Incrementalism is not going to get us out of the housing crisis or the climate crisis and all the other crises. We have a mental health crisis now happening with COVID. It's not going to help us cure all those things. So yes, I am 100% a fighter, and I would pull a vote if it wasn't fully committing to helping our community.
Thank you. I see Deborah Gonzalez. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Maya. How are you
Deborah.
today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I live in a Section 8 based housing on the Lower East Side, and I've been here for over 30 years, and I really appreciate my building, but 40% is Hispanic, 40% is Asian. And we are being harassed by our management company. And a lot of the Asians and Hispanic people don't understand their rights. And we try to explain it to them to give them more of an understanding of what's going on. And then there's no oversight. We reach out to HUD. They take our private information to their home and do our recertification. And that, I've had identity theft, and that shouldn't be. We have a perfectly good office in the building that they refuse to use. And this was even before the pandemic. So I want to know, how can we have managers like the one we have in Section 8? Because now they're talking about privatizing housing. And if this is going on with Section 8, who's going to oversee the housing or Section 8? So I want to know, what can we do? Because HUD has been useless.
I understand this is, you unfortunately are not the first person to say that to me. You're probably the 100th person to say that to me. One of the things that's so frustrating is accessing information. That's something that I always dealt with as a child. It's something that I'm very good at, is navigating bureaucracy. We shouldn't have to be forced to navigate things to access information. It's incredibly frustrating. We need a way to make sure that there is a central location of where to access resources, access information. Every one of you should have access to free legal aid and free legal counsel without having to wait months and months for that to happen. There has to be stronger tenant protections. The tenants should be running the buildings. There should be more. There's a lot of things I'm saying that I want there to be done for NYCHA in particular. For example, with the heat that's gone out right now in the houses, when something like that happens, hotels should be immediately available for that. But back to your question. I'm tired of the privatizing aspect because it rids the federal government for actually paying what they owe NYCHA, which is to fully fund it, period. NYCHA should not be going into privatizing hands. To me, this is always a trick that people are trying to do to figure out how to make money off of low income people, off of people in poverty. It's very, it's grotesque to me. So that's what I would be fighting for, is to make sure that public housing stays public, stays out of privatizing hands. And also they try to add additional bureaucracy to make it complicated. It's made complicated on purpose for you not to access the information that you need, to not have the help that you need. Because then they're saying, don't worry, we'll take care of that. What they mean by taking care of that is they're using it to move money to private contractors into privatizing hands. So trust me when I say I will fight on your behalf for that.
I appreciate that. Just one more thing. I appreciate that HUD is there to help us, but they never help us. They believe what the managers are saying. We live in these buildings. We know what's wrong with the building. The managers are collecting money and no one is overseeing what's not being done.
I agree. I agree with you. Yes.
Thank you. I see Lila has your hand up. If anyone who has not yet asked a question of Maya, Jaime, I see you raising your hand. We'll go to Jaime first, Lila, if you don't mind. Jaime, go ahead, please. And you're on mute, Jaime. There you go. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. I mean, with the presence of COVID, everybody's well aware, and it's all over the community, and for that matter, the nation, the necessity for mental health services.
Mhm.
Now, we have come as a director of the Roberto Clemente Center, I'll tell you that we're a product with in the 60s and 70s, there was the awareness done from some studies at Yale University, Hollings and Redledge, that there was discrimination between the services that persons with means got, which was psychotherapy, and the services that poor people got, that was really medications.
Mhm.
The Community Mental Health Services Act and some other things came on board with a national consciousness then to do something for the communities, in the communities, bringing services to people. Our center is a result of some of those efforts. We locally and nationally are at the place that we were in the 60s, in the 70s. Mental health.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If we're able to just get to the question, as this will most likely be the last question. I apologize.
Okay, so mental health services now are watered down. The 50-minute session is 45-minute session, is now 30-minute sessions. For the poor, not for the paying private clients. Services were provided by trained professionals in psychiatry, in psychology, in social work. Now we have mental health counselors, peer counselors. Good for them because there's nobody else, but it's watered down. Poor people. We need a national stimulus, the way it occurred then, to support training at university level, jobs at community and other levels. And I just want to bring that to the attention of you and all the other candidates to see what your opinion is. Will you fight for something like that?
Oh, well, let me say first and foremost, thank you, Jaime, for that question. Listen, mental health is critical to me, so important to me, muy importante, because when my mother died, when I was 16 years old, I was going through a mental health crisis at that point. I was dealing with anxiety and panic disorder. And I have long seen the disparities in how people who do not have money, how they are treated and have access, and those who are wealthy, what they have access to as far as mental health care. With this COVID crisis, there is a mental health crisis happening right now as well. And we need essential services for that. This is why with Medicaid for All, the newest iteration of it for 2021, I finally support something like this because it's inclusive of mental health care. We also have a shortage of mental health care workers as well. So there has to be massive investments in mental health care accessibility in America, and to make sure that there's not a disparate way of siloing the best care to those that have the wealthiest and those with low income. I hope that gives you a quick answer, Jaime, to that. It's absolutely essential for that. And we're talking about in Puerto Rico is having the same issue as well, with the cutback on money, the cutback on services. There's a lack of access to mental health care there as well. So I hope that I answered that. Okay.
Thank you, Maya. And I think we'll have to leave it there. We thank you for your time.
Can I just say one more sentence?
Go ahead.
When Io was talking, I kind of only half heard her question a little bit because of her headphones. I believe she was talking about HDFC, but I saw in the chat that she may be mentioning NYCHA, because I definitely wasn't talking about NYCHA profiting. I was specifically speaking about the HDFC that I live in.
Just maybe like 10 seconds just to clarify.
Yeah, to clarify, I was talking about HDFCs, only HDFCs, and 400,000 is like way too much for someone to afford.
I'm gonna cut you off there, Io, and I thank you, Maya, for your response earlier. We appreciate
I was
your time.
talking about HDFCs. I'm sorry, Josh. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we heard you,
Yes.
and I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maya, and we appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. And great. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to my co-president of Coalition for District Alternative, Andrea Gordillo.
Thank you, Josh. And thanks everyone again for coming. It's great to see all of our CoDA members, our neighbors and our friends from, Uptown and from Queens and Brooklyn. I'd like to give a quick shout out to our Assembly member, Harvey Epstein, who's here today, as well as Assembly member Emily Gallagher and State Senator Julia Salazar. We're thrilled to have you all. Again, thanks for coming. And I see that our next candidate, Rana Abdelhamid, sorry, I rolled my R's by accident. Rana Abdelhamid. I was just in Peru, so I'm sorry. And she's joining us now. And as a quick reminder to Rana, we are giving candidates up to 10 minutes to speak to the group. And if you would like to waive some of that time in favor for the 15 minutes that we have allocated for questions and answers, you're welcome to do that. And then when we go to Q&A, again, a quick reminder, keep it under 30 seconds so we can get through as many questions and topics as possible. And Rana, if you are there, please go ahead and get started. Oh, hi, there you are.
I'm right here. Thank you so much, Andrea. I really appreciate it. And thank you for rolling that R. So I wanted, first of all, thank you all for everyone for being on this call. I wanted to start quickly by providing a visual description of myself for those who might need it. So I am wearing a light green top and a green hijab that's wrapped up on my head that's dark green. I'm wearing hoops. I'm a brown Muslim woman, and I'm sitting in front of a blank cream beige background. I'm super grateful for everyone who's on this call, and super grateful to have had the opportunity to meet so many CoDA members over the past couple of months as I've been building this campaign. My name is Rana Abdelhamid. My pronouns are she, her. I was born and raised in Queens. I'm the child of Egyptian immigrants. I grew up in a really beautiful working class neighborhood that's nicknamed Little Egypt. Most people have not heard of it, but it is made predominantly of a North African Muslim majority community where I saw growing up how my neighbors, my family started from scratch, building so many of our institutions. One of which, my favorite restaurant in Queens called Mumbar, which the Chef Mustafa took 7 years just to build the outside of the building through art and creativity. And my father was also a small business owner as I was growing up. He wanted to bring halal meat to New York City, which is funny now that there's a halal cart on every single block in New York. And he basically started with my family a halal deli grocery that we built together. And he poured his heart and soul into it. It became a spot where if you were looking for extra cash and you wanted to sell some goods, or if you were looking for housing, or if you wanted to know the gossip that was happening on the block, this is where you would go to hang out. But unfortunately, over time, like many small businesses across the city, and like much of the development across the city, my family's small business was bought out by the building that it was in was bought out by a real estate developer, and our business was unfortunately priced out, as well as our home. So not only could we not afford to keep our business open, but we no longer, because that was our means of income, we no longer could actually afford our home, and we were pushed out of our home. And I, growing up as a young woman, you came to a lot of movement work and organizing from that space, but also came growing up as a young Muslim woman in a post 9/11 New York City. So my neighborhood, like many Muslim majority communities across the tri-state area, were targeted by police violence, by racial profiling, by NYPD stop and frisk. And I myself while I was walking down the street in Queens, was assaulted by a man who tried to take off my hijab. And like many women, non-binary people, disabled folks, minoritized people across the city, I felt insecure walking down the streets of my city for such a long time after that in my own skin. And that experience, through a lot of beautiful mentorship and guidance from women in my life and elders in my life, inspired me to want to step into leadership to actually create some change. And so as a teenage public high school student, I took the one skill that I had at the time, which is I had been doing Shotokan karate since I was 7, and I started training young women in my neighborhood in self-defense and hosting these spaces where we would talk about our experiences growing up as working class, low-income women of color in Queens and in New York City. And over the past decade, that's been the focus, and the majority of my work has been building out this organization, reaching thousands of women and non-binary people across the globe, doing self-defense and healing justice work, and really reshaping what safety and security looks like for ourselves. But as a public high school student, as someone who's from Queens and from my own community, and someone doing movement work, I have had the opportunity and privilege to work alongside so many people in my community on various issues, whether it comes to housing justice and housing security, or food security, or immigrant justice, or racial equity, and have been plugged into the human rights movement and human rights work as a member of Amnesty International, but also as a board member and activist. And a lot of this work really culminated within the context of the pandemic. Like many of you probably are very well aware, the reality of inequality in our city was devastating to a lot of communities, including my own community. I remember early on, my mom actually contracted the virus in March, and on the nights when she could not breathe, we were told by doctors not to take her to a hospital in Queens because our hospitals were so overwhelmed. And in those moments where this was happening, I also saw how my community so beautifully came together, delivering groceries, building out mutual aid networks, building out community fridges, fighting for our small businesses. And this is something that I know that so many of you are also familiar with, right? Because so many of you who I had an opportunity to connect with have been doing this work too. But at the same time, while this was going on, I felt the frustration, which was not new to me as someone who grew up in this city, but felt the reality of our leadership being missing in action, as our small businesses were suffering and shutting down, as immigrants were excluded from federal aid, especially undocumented immigrants, as more and more New Yorkers got sick, went hungry, and struggled to find a place to sleep. The people who were supposed to represent us were nowhere to be found. And the people who were supposed to be fighting for us weren't fighting for us at all, or for anything for that fact. And I realized that this isn't new, but at the same time, I saw how beautifully we showed up for each other. And I know that because I had the opportunity to speak to so many of you, and I have felt inspired by so many of you. So whether it's Tito's fight for Puerto Rico's liberation against US imperialism, or Lila and Camille organizing for food security in the district, or whether it's seeing the commitment that John and Harvey have standing with deaf tenants at Tanya Towers, or Alana and Josh's commitment to criminal justice reform, or even just last night speaking with Miss Mia, who has been committed to mental health of our students across the city. I've seen how people have shown up for our small businesses, from Casa Adela to Mumbar, which I just spoke about in Queens, with so much love and commitment and grit. And I've seen and personally experienced our fight as working people, as public housing residents, as immigrants, as disabled people. And I just truly believe that we deserve someone who's going to fight as hard for us the way we fight for each other, because we deserve to live free, fair, and full lives. We deserve to live without hunger. We deserve to live in housing we can actually afford. And this is what this campaign is about. As your congressperson, I'm planning to fight hard, as I've always fought for my entire life, to fully fund public housing and Section 8, to bolster tenant protections, repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment, enact universal commercial and residential rent control. And I'm going to fight for paid leave, universal childcare. I'm going to fight to end workplace discrimination and harassment, so women and disabled people and immigrants can succeed, for a Green New Deal, for a Green New Deal against the current climate crisis, and against US imperialism, whether that's in Puerto Rico or across the globe. And I'm going to do it with all of you. And I know that this isn't going to be an easy race. And I know that the only way that we're going to win this is going to be in collective through our collective power. And I'll say this, that we launched this race in April, and I feel really, really lucky to have been able to co-create such an incredible vision with so many people across this district, getting to know so many people across this district as I came to this race, doing something that nobody thought a young girl from Queens can ever accomplish, right? And so since we started, we've been able to mobilize close to 11,000 small dollar contributions, not taking $1 from corporate PACs or real estate, mobilizing close to $800,000 for this campaign from small dollars. We have been able to receive the endorsements of sitting electeds, which usually insurgent campaigns are not able to do, from people like Tiffany Cavan and Brad Lander, who's our city's comptroller. We have been able to mobilize, most importantly, a grassroots volunteer base where we're reaching out to voters and having phone banks every single night, trying to understand what are the needs that our communities have. Our first ever volunteer event had over 250 people in attendance. And that's because we're doing this race, we're building out this race from a place of deep love, from a place of commitment, from a place of vision for what is possible for our district. And I'm excited and looking forward to taking your questions and learning from so many of you as you all have done so much of this work. So thank you, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rana. The first on the stack is Scott. Please go ahead. If you could unmute yourself, Scott, where, or you're still on mute. I'm not sure if maybe Sean.
Okay, I think I get it. Thank you. So my question is to the candidates, since you mentioned that you have received a lot of small donations, can you clarify to what extent those donations are coming from within the district as opposed from outside groups such as Justice Democrats and Democratic Socialists of America outside of the district you're running in? Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to clarify that Justice Democrats, and yes, I am a Justice Democrat, which I feel really proud and honored to have that designation as someone who's recruited and I'm running as a JD candidate, similar to people like AOC, who's recruited and ran by Justice Democrats, or Cori Bush. They're actually an entity that doesn't necessarily fund. So the majority of our money is not coming from Justice Democrats. It's coming from us reaching out to individual donors, having conversations with individual donors. And I'm definitely happy to follow up on the specific numbers of the percentage of what comes from inside of our district afterwards. If you leave your email, I could also send it over to whoever's on the call to give you that number. But I just want to clarify that I'm not receiving a massive check from JD. There is some funding that comes from within their network, but a lot of it is just hard work, having conversations, calling people within my network, calling people beyond that network. And all of you know how hard cold calls are, but I've been hustling and grinding.
Thank you. I'm going to go to CoDA members Olympia, then Sean, and then Doreen. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Maloney is a senior Democrat in Congress, so I would like to hear your thinking about why is it a good time to change?
Yeah, Olympia, thank you so much for that question. I really, really appreciate it. Absolutely, and I hear that, right? I think what we have learned over the past couple of years, which is really powerful, how we have new leadership, when we have new leadership, new progressive leadership in Congress, we have someone like a Cori Bush, right, who's going to fight tooth and nail to make sure that the eviction moratorium is extended at a federal level because her constituency and her community's lives are dependent on it. We're going to have someone whose leadership, like AOC, right, isn't just going to have, it is going to actually write the Green New Deal, right, and the Green New Deal for public housing, not just sign on to it, right, which is what we're seeing oftentimes with senior level leadership. And I think the important question here to ask is when we talk about experience, when we talk about leadership, we always have to ask what kind of experience? What kind of leadership have we seen our representatives currently have? And so what I have seen oftentimes oftentimes is absent, at least to my community, absent leadership that has centered corporations, that has taken millions of dollars from the real estate industry, that has signed on to legislation that has been harmful to our communities, whether it's the 1994 crime bill, or whether it's the Iraq War, or whether it's the Promesa Act, right? These are realities that have harmed Black and Brown and immigrant communities for so long, versus being able to actually bring new blood, bring expertise that is connected and understands the urgency of our communities, that is committed to the realities and lived experiences of our communities, and is going to work hard and is going to hustle to make sure that our voices are represented through various models and theories of change, whether it's standing on the and protesting outside and making sure that our voices are heard that way through cultural advocacy and political advocacy, or whether it's actually making sure that we're working alongside electeds who've been in office for a really long time to get bills passed as well. So that's kind of what I'm really excited and looking forward to doing.
Thank you. I'll go to Sean, and Jamie, I see your hand raised. I'll put you on the stack as well after Doreen and Lisa.
So my question is kind of like a build on Olympia's. I mean, you present as a very young woman of color, Muslim. Many would say that while they agree with you politically, that that you probably aren't qualified because of all those identities to be a leader for this district and to represent us on a national level. What would you say to folks like that?
Yeah, I'm very aware that I come into spaces presenting a certain way where people's biases might kick in, right? When a lot of young electeds who are on this call, I saw Julia Salazar is on this call, right? Any young woman of color who might run for office, like, we are told to wait our turn. We are told that we may not be experienced enough. We are told that we may not have the skill set. But what we know is that when we have young people, when we have young women of color, oftentimes our impact is really, really powerful. And I could tell you this, that I'm someone who for my entire life has fought and has organized and who's been on the front lines of these issues. After I experienced a hate-based attack as a young Muslim woman,
Okay, bye.
As a 14-year-old, I worked hard to not only create healing spaces for myself, but for my community. I founded this nonprofit that has global presence, that has reached thousands of people across the globe. And at the same time, our current representative was wearing a burqa on the House floor to justify the invasion of a country that wasn't even involved in what was going on politically at the time. As a part of my human rights work with Amnesty International, I worked on the ground in places like Puerto Rico to actually work alongside reproductive justice activists to advocate for abortion access, especially after Hurricane Maria, where there was only one clinic on the island. At the same time, our current representative voted for the Promesa Act and still isn't committing to abolishing the Fiscal Review Board, which has done so much harm to so many communities. And there's so many more examples like that. And again, I'm not new as someone whose experiences are being discounted or dismissed. Both Representative Cori Bush, AOC have shown how experience working and organizing, building a diverse coalition, being connected to communities, understanding the urgency of the need is so important in terms of being effective as a representative at a national level. And that's how I intend to lead.
Thank you. I'll go to Doreen.
Hi, Rana. It's good to see you. My question is about housing. So I'm on the Community Board 1 in Queens, grown up, lived here, and I'm on the Housing Committee, and we see problematic projects like Innovation Queens occurring, which are threatened to gentrify and really destroy the neighborhood. Much to my surprise, Tiffany Caban voted in favor of the development at Hoyt Street, 31st Street, which does not have sufficient deeply affordable housing. And I want to hear from you, your plan, and since you mentioned you're in tandem with her, like, what is your vision to stop things like Innovation Queens? Will you stand against that? What is your plan to actually make sure New York City is affordable for the working class, working poor, Black and Brown communities?
Thank you so much, Doreen. I really appreciate that question because I care deeply about housing justice and housing access and housing equity. And it breaks my heart to see the gentrification of Astoria and to see the gentrification of our city and the displacement of so many people in our community. And I think it's really important for us to work alongside communities who are organizing, who've been on the front lines, who are doing the work, and to do things. And we released our campaign has released a platform that is housing for the people. And one of the things that I think are really important is that we have to end things like exclusionary zoning laws that have historically been racist, have been used to trap many Black and brown families into neighborhoods which are under-resourced. So you know, Doreen, that in Astoria, right, we grew up in a neighborhood literally nicknamed Asma Alley, right, where immigrant communities, Black and brown communities are relegated to poor air quality, lack of access to health care, oftentimes poorly funded public school systems. And this type of exclusionary zoning is something that we have to stand against. At a federal level, I stand firmly in support of doing things like repealing the Faircloth Amendment, fighting for fully funding public housing, fully funding Section 8 so that so many of our community and members of our community are not waiting on these long lines to actually have access, strengthening tenant rights. We know that just to get simple repairs, right, or the poor lack of quality in our housing oftentimes is dismissed and we know that when someone has right to counsel, their access to these repairs, their access to be able to feel like they can advocate for their own housing justice is so important. And so these are all things that I'm going to stand for and I'm going to fight for because they're super important and impact our communities on a day-to-day level.
Thank you, Rana. I'll recognize Lisa now.
Yeah, I'm just curious if I understood something that Carolyn Maloney said. I'm quite sure she said she was endorsed by the Progressive Caucus. I'm wondering, do you have a reaction to that? And why do you think that would be? And how would you be integrated with the Progressive Caucus?
Yeah, I really appreciate your question. I think, of course, Representative Maloney has deep relationships that she has leveraged throughout her tenure as a congressional member. And I look forward to, as a representative, working alongside people who I feel values aligned with, including members of the Progressive Caucus and including newer electeds who are joining the congressional, who are now newly elected to Congress, like, as I mentioned, Dr. Bowman and Cori Bush, who I feel values aligned with as well. And so I do look forward to working alongside progressive electeds as someone who identifies as a progressive and who's endorsed and backed by national progressive organizations and electeds.
Thank you. Jamie? Please unmute.
Yes, thank you. Welcome to, maybe this is a beginning conversation on mental health. I raised COVID has dictated the need for mental health to be increased, mental health services. At this point in time, what we are looking at is at a mental health crisis, pre-COVID and exacerbated by COVID. Mental health services, from being a social responsibility, have been turned into a private model, private business model. As a result, services have been cut down. The 50-hour session psychotherapy that people with means get was cut to 45 minutes. It's cut to 30 minutes, and that is not a time enough for psychotherapy. It's a business model where it's watered down. Professionals are also from psychiatry, psychology, social work, less.
Jamie, we if you could get to your question as soon as possible. We only have 3 minutes left. So
okay, and so the question, I said it's a beginning dialogue on this, but would you be able to support a national effort for increased support for training and employment of appropriate, culturally sensitive professionals in the mental health field?
Yes, Jamie, I'm so grateful for your question because actually a lot of my background and work has been focused on mental health and crisis intervention, specifically with survivors of gender-based violence. And I know how there is such a lack of mental health resources and such a lack of professional support, whether you look at our education system, right? Where oftentimes when there's a mental health crisis or there are mental health challenges, there are more punitive measures that are taken into account, or whether you look at the ways in which we respond to violence as a whole, or we respond to mental health crises as a whole, is oftentimes criminalized, right? And I think that more than ever, especially, you're absolutely right, within the context of the pandemic, where I have a 13-year-old sister and I see the social anxiety of her dealing with the pandemic and schooling and the disruption within her school system, having spent so many parts of her childhood, right, within the context of this. And I worry about the reality of so many of our young people, so many of our community in this current moment. And so a couple of thoughts on that is, I think the way we think about community safety should be deeply rooted in a mental health framework and a mental health intervention framework. And that looks at training community members to be able to do mental health intervention, crisis response work, trauma-informed intervention work. And I know that this is possible because the nonprofit that I started does this. We train community members to do trauma-informed facilitation for survivors of various forms of violence from within their own communities. And it's very, very effective. And it's actually one of the most effective interventions for domestic violence. We need to do things like making sure that we actually have the facilities to train and to host these spaces and create accessible, culturally responsive mental health. And so I absolutely 100% agree with you and really grateful for that question. And yes, would love to continue to be in conversation. I do hope this is the beginning of the conversation.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two more questions. If we could keep them short. Tito, go ahead. Tito, are you there? He had his hand physically raised. Maybe I'll go to Aura and then Tito after that.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, thank you, Tito. Go ahead.
Perdona. Me gusta tu pasión. I love your passion.
Yes.
I forgot the question because I've been listening so long, so I apologize. Move on to someone else.
Okay, go ahead, Aura.
Bien, gracias.
I just wanted to ask, if you were to win a seat like this, what would it mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Aura, for that question. I don't take this race lightly at all. It took me a very long time to decide to jump into this. And I'm only doing this really with the understanding that we have so much at stake. If elected, I would be the first Muslim woman to represent New York City at a federal level. I'd be the first Arab, first North African to represent at any level of governance in New York City. And my community has not had representation for so long. So many of our communities have been impacted by just a neglectful government process and policies that have not centered our communities. And I am super ready to work tooth and nail to make sure that our communities' voices are represented and that housing justice, climate justice, equity for all of our communities are actually fully realized.
All right. Thank you so much, Rana. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But thank you for the time and thank you everyone for your questions. And that concludes our forum for today. And our recording secretary Sean will be we'll send around a recording of the forum for anyone who would like to talk, review it. And then also if Rana's team, is welcome to put her email in the chat if anyone had any lingering questions. Again, thank you all for joining and I hope you have a wonderful weekend and stay safe, everyone.
And just real quick, Andrea, if I can remind CoDA members that we'll meet on Thursday, as you know, for our endorsement meeting. You should have the Zoom credentials in your email. as always, contact us if you have any questions. But I just want to echo Andrea's thanks to the candidates and to everyone for coming this afternoon. Thanks so much.
Please pay your dues.
Bye, everyone.